Hello and welcome. This session is going to show you how to configure Maligno, both when it comes to the server and the client side. So in a previous video we saw how to install the tool, and this is the actual result. Here you see the directory structure that we get after the installation. There is a file, server-config.xml, which allows you to configure all the different parameters for the server side. So in here we have a section covering the Metasploit integration. Note that you will require some basic knowledge on Metasploit if you want to understand all of these options. But basically you can provide here the path where Metasploit is located, the cache folder where Maligno is going to store the different payloads generated with MSF Venom, the resource folder where all the different resource files that Maligno generates, so you can use them with MSF console later, will be stored in, and then specific sections for the payloads that we will generate. As you can see here, all payloads have an ID. This is basically something that will identify the payload that you want to request when sending an HTTP request to Maligno from a client. The payload that you define here is actually the same as you find in Metasploit. So in this case we have a Meterpreter reverse HTTP. The L host, this is in fact right now the IP address which I have in my machine. Okay, over there. The L port, the encoder that we are going to use while generating the payload, any potential bad characters, and the number of iterations. You can create many different payloads if you want, just by adding one block like this to your configuration file. This will actually just be recognized by Maligno the next time you start the tool. So for this case, I am configuring Maligno in a single server setup where we are going to run Maligno and Metasploit on the same Kali machine. And as you see, the multi-handler that Metasploit is going to start will be hosted on this IP address and this port for reverse HTTP, this port for reverse HTTPS, and finally here for the last one. This would be the Python version of Meterpreter with reverse TCP. Down here we have another section which is scope, and here you can define either single IP addresses or network segments. That includes the hosts that you want to use in your scope. So this means that Maligno will serve the payloads to any request coming from any of the addresses included here. If you don't know what address is going to send the request, you can actually use a wildcard, any, and then any address will be accepted, and Maligno will send the payload then. Finally, we have a server section in which we define different types of parameters regarding the Maligno configuration for the actual server. So it will be listening on this address, on this port. For this exercise we will not use SSL, so we can actually inspect the traffic, and no proxy. And here in the end we'll see a profile which will be loaded by both the server and the client. If we go to that specific folder, we see here profiles. We see that we have a file, standard XML, the one defined in the server configuration. Here is where you can actually tweak, or you can configure, customize how the communications between the client and the server will work. This is in fact what the communication will look like on the wire. So for example, we have a section for the request. So when a client is sending a request to Maligno. It will have to match index.aspx in this case, and the payload will be provided in a parameter called ID. If you wanted to include either a prefix with more parameters or a suffix with more parameters in the request, you can actually specify that here. The server response, here you can choose what protocol you want to send the response with. The server banner, disclosed by the server, and then the URL with a last resort. This would be useful in case a specific request comes from a host which is not in scope. In that case, Maligno will just redirect the host to such address. We have an error template which becomes really useful when using the HTTP or HTTPS meterpreter alternatives, because the multi-handler will be configured with the contents of this error message contained by this template. So in this case we have Microsoft IIS, and this is a standard error page from IIS. So Metasploit will be configured with this, and if invalid requests are sent to the multi-handler, Metasploit will actually answer with a Microsoft IIS error message. If you want to include different headers on your HTTP response, you can include a pair of values, just like we see here in this header section, where you have the actual field and the value. Next, here on the network section, here we can configure everything related to the network configuration, how the communications will work in practice. So we are going to use base64 to encode all the payload before transmission, the block size, which is going to be used while encrypting the information before transmission. Here you can see as well the padding character and the secret used by the AES cipher. If you want to activate the gatecode mode, which means that the client will request the same payload many different times, here you can define how often or how many requests will be sent, and the delay or the time space that the client will wait before sending a new request. So this is actually for throttling the speed. Regarding the client, you can define the user agent, the time that the client will use in order to wait before the actual payload or the functionality is activated on the client side. So this could be useful if you want to bypass, for example, simple sandboxes. And the same, the request sent by the client. Here you can define all the headers that you want to include, specifically if you're interested in simulating malware or an adversary replication. So when everything is in place, we just can close here, open a terminal, and you can in fact start Maligno. If you have errors or problems in your configuration, Maligno should be able to detect it and tell you exactly what you have to fix. So let me just move here to the right place and then start it. So right now Maligno is generating different payloads that we have defined in the server configuration. It will take just a moment. We are running the latest version right now, and everything is ready. Maligno is now waiting for connections. If we check the directories here, we see that MSF cache is now created, and in here we have all the payloads that we have defined. As you see, we have numbers 0, 1, and 2 on a default file. The default is actually a copy of 0, which means that if a client is requesting a payload which doesn't exist, then the default will be sent. If you inspect this, here we have the value base64 encoded, and of course encrypted with AES. Here on the MSF resources, we have right now one specific resource file for each payload. So you can use this with MSF console, and you don't have to type things, just load the file. So let me start here. Metasploit. Okay, let's open a terminal in here, and let's, for example, load the first one. So this will prepare a multi-handler that will wait for reverse HTTP connections. Of course, we're talking about Meterpreter. Okay, everything is now started, and we should have a multi-handler waiting. So we have the server ready, and the next step is to generate a client, and this will be done with a tool here called ClientGen. And the syntax is really simple. The only thing it requires is the actual Maligno server configuration file. So we just provide this. We generate one client for each payload, and then you can find it here on the clients folder. If you have a look at the contents, this is in fact right now it's obfuscated, but this is the actual logic that should be now deployed on the victim machine. You could, for example, deploy the Python file and execute it with Python on the victim machine. That would require that Python and Encripto is installed, but you also have the possibility to compile and generate an exe with, for example, PyInstaller, and in that case the victim machine will not require any Python installation at all. So this is all I had in mind for this video, and in the next one we will start using Maligno and starting getting payloads and shells. Okay, thanks for watching.